Welcome back. Things move fast in the Trump administration. Let's catch you up on what happened this week. During a Florida rally on Saturday, President Trump seemed to claim there was a terrorist attack in Sweden. There wasn't. Vice President Mike Pence reaffirmed our commitment to NATO. Trump denounced the rise of anti-Semitism. He also scrapped an Obama-era rule protecting transgender students' right to use the bathroom with the identity of the sex that they identify with. We also saw a ramping up of deportations, an executive order to strip away federal regulations on business, and the blocking of certain media outlets from a press briefing. And joining us for more on the Trump administration's fifth week in office is Rita Ferrandino of the Sarasota County Democratic Party, Christian Ziegler, a Republican state committee man for Sarasota County, and Wendy March, a veteran political reporter and correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times. Welcome, everyone. You know, I put together this very complicated ledger before we went on the air of the week that was. And I put it into two columns. And Christian, I'm going to start with you. Because on one hand, we had the appointment of General McMaster as the new National Security Advisor, which both Republicans and Democrats applauded. I mean, this guy is a pretty impressive guy. He condemned a rise in anti-Semitism, better late than never. Vice President Pence and Secretary of Defense Mattis went to Europe and reaffirmed U.S. support in NATO. And the Secretary of State Tillerson went to Mexico and talked Turkey, whether or not you agree or not. I mean, that was a big trip. But on the other side of the ledger, and I know you want to talk about his accomplishments, he called the media enemy. He banned CNN from an off-camera briefing today. He rolled back transgender rights. He cracked down on marijuana. I said that the states will, like Florida, who passed it, and many other states, that the feds are going to enforce federal regulations. He tried to get the FBI to say nothing. There was nothing to the links with Russia, and the FBI refused to. And then there's that little incident in Sweden, which alluding that there was some kind of terrorist operation there, which came as a surprise to the Swedes. So, Christian, how do you balance these things?
Well, I think the American people, they elected Donald Trump, and what you're seeing is he's executing on what he promised, and point by point, and the first half of what you described, the second half, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, like with calling the media the enemy. That's not actually true.
That's what he tweeted.
Well, if you read the tweet, the beginning of the tweet starts with, the fake news is your enemy. That's what it is, the fake news media, such as, and he lists them out. He lists out 3 or 4 of them, but he said fake news is the enemy. Now, obviously, the media is going to pull that out of context.
What is fake news?
And they want to say, fake news is inaccurate reporting, which they do frequently. And what happens in the media...
I don't want to get argumentative.
Yeah. And I'd love for us to just pull it up, because I really don't think that's the case.
Pull it up. I'd love it.
Is there a difference? You know, I've made mistakes in reporting of news. Fake news is the term that was coined to describe what the Russians were doing, which was basically creating news stories and placing them in social media feeds.
Well, see, the media has a responsibility to cover the issues. Now, what you see with a lot of the media, where there's frustration, at least with conservatives and Republicans, is you guys generate the content, and then you generate context with that content. And a lot of the context you do is very skewed over to the left, and it's supporting Democrats. And I think we've seen that. They're the first to jump and attack, Trump on something silly as, MLK's bust isn't in the Oval Office, and that's a big deal. That's a big deal. But guess what? Guess what gets covered there?
That's called an error.
Well, it's an error, but what happens is when they report that, and all these media outlets go out there and they cover it, they throw it in their headlines, and then guess what? A couple hours later, he says, oops, sorry, I was wrong, and that does not get covered. And the American people are frustrated with that, and they're frustrated with how the media picks and chooses on what they're covering.
I want our other guests to join the conversation.
Yeah, but others of us would like to speak, especially since we have 2 journalists
I just want to make one last point.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the FBI investigating the contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia, those facts are not being disputed.
Well, but even if you see what happened right there, actually
the rest of the world is reporting on the same news. So the fake news aspect was just a pivot to get away from the real issue, which was, what is Russia doing?
No, because that FBI story.
I think, Alan, that when Donald Trump says fake news, he basically means any story that he doesn't like and that doesn't make him look good. On several occasions now, including the New York Times story on contact between his campaign and Russia, he has labeled stories fake news while acknowledging that they were basically true or not denying them. Now,
Just let him speak.
when he says, when Donald Trump refers to 4 of the 5 major national news networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, plus the New York Times, plus the Washington Post as fake news, and then when he expands that definition to include the LA Times and others who were excluded from the press briefing today, then pretty obviously he's not talking about it. The term fake news has lost the meaning it originally had.
Are you, Wendy, are you concerned about the overall impact that this is going to have on hardworking journalists like yourself who have worked for a long time in terms of covering politics, covering issues, and whether or not your readers are going to believe what you have to write?
Well, the belief in the news media is an odd sort of a duck to try to gauge. If you poll it nationwide, it doesn't look good. People say the media is wrong. But if you ask them about the particular source of news that they use, they trust it. So, like, what I think you're going to see is you're going to see reporters who may get cut off of the access that they've enjoyed in the past to high-level political figures. They'll just have to do reporting a different way.
All right, we are just getting started. We'll have more on President Trump's 5th week in office coming up right after a check on our weather. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the week at the White House, and our guests tonight are Sarasota Democratic Party member Rita Ferrandino, Republican State Committee man Christian Ziegler, and political reporter Wendy March. Christian, I want to start with you. What is your take in terms of the rollback, in terms of the transgender issue? After last spring, I believe it was President Obama who gave directions to school departments across the country that they were to allow transgender students to use the bathrooms of the sex they identify with.
Well, again, when you look at this transgender issue, you have the media out there, and we want to talk about fake news and context and creating context.
No, you want to talk about the fake news.
Well, no, that was brought up.
context.
That was brought up a previous segment. But what's happening is the media says that this is a transgender bathroom issue, and that's not necessarily accurate. That's a portion of it. Elementary schools, we can talk bathrooms. Middle schools, you start talking about overnight trips with boys sleeping where girls are and girls sleeping where boys are. And then you look at high school sports, you have boys wrestling girls and girls wrestling, you know, that's when you start looking at this ban or this transgender guidance, if you will, that's what it was doing. So all Trump did was say, let's leave it up to the states because every area is different. And again, pushing that control and that directive down to the state level.
But with so much on his agenda, is this the battle he wants to get into?
I think this is an important battle. This was a national discussion last year when it came up. It was a heated discussion, even locally here in Sarasota County, all across the country. This is an important issue, especially for conservatives and Republicans, and he's delivering on it.
I think an important issue is to be talking about his commitment he made to bringing jobs to this country. And I don't think we've seen much of that. I think we've seen in the last 5 weeks an administration where the leader has a gun-style approach where he's got factions within his administration. He has actively discussed that.
Hold on.
Consumer confidence is at the highest it's been in a decade in the United States under Trump.
His presidential numbers are the lowest we've seen in the last.
But we're talking about the economy. When it comes to jobs, people have a lot of confidence in this president.
There's another area I want to get to, but Rita, the man's been in office for a little bit more than 30 days, so you would not have concrete results in terms of job numbers.
I'm talking about his agenda that he has put forth. We're seeing a lot of conversation about deportation. We're seeing this transgender issue. I want to see what's he doing to bring more jobs into the U.S.
One of the first steps he took was to get us out of TPP, and that's why the Democratic Party lost the election, because Democratic leaders across the country, including yourself right here, ignore the workers right in middle America, and TPP benefits them. He got us out of that unfair deal, and that's going to bring jobs, and that's what the workers of America care about.
Wendy, how is this playing amongst the Democratic and Republican faithful on the Suncoast? I mean, are we still in a situation that Republicans who voted for Trump are staying with them, and
Absolutely.
the Democrats are completely out in the wilderness?
Absolutely. I can't narrow it down to the Tampa Bay area, but statewide, at least, polling shows that something like 80% Republicans approve of the job he's doing. On the other side, again, and I've said this on this show before over the last few weeks, we're seeing what to me is a really unusual blossoming of grassroots movements by people who are not previously involved in politics, and some of it comes from this that Chris got right there, a thing called the Indivisible movement. This week I interviewed a woman who is a working mother who organized the mock town hall meeting for Marco Rubio. She has a new baby and a job, and she organized a gathering of like 600 or 700 people. It exceeded the capacity of the room. She did it on her own. She's never been involved in politics, never been to a political party meeting before, never been to a campaign meeting. That's unusual. It is difficult, though, for me as a reporter to gauge how big, how intense, how strong that is, and whether it will last.
Well, it was difficult for reporters to gauge back in 2010 what the impact of the Tea Party would be.
Or for that matter, the impact of the Trump movement. Grassroots movements of this kind, they're very tough for me sitting there with my cell phone to pin them down and describe concretely whether they're real or just evanescent.
And Christian, are you going to make the case that with the handbook that you have there that's been distributed by Indivisible, that this is all basically top down and not bottom up?
It is. That's a portion of it. I think the biggest thing that makes it different than the Tea Party is in 2010, I worked in Congress, so I saw the Tea Party engage with Congress, and what was happening there that really put fear in Congress were the Republicans, because this was a core part of their base. What's different now is the people that are coming out, these are people that aren't going to vote for those congressmen or women anyway. They're on the left, they're Democrats, they're frustrated with how the election came out, and really all they're doing, and this is a guide here, and this is going to create frustration around the country, is people are frustrated that Congress isn't doing their job, and all they're doing is they put out a whole guide here. This is a great, document that they have here, the way they laid it out. It's going to maybe be effective, but what they're doing is they're trying to obstruct Congress. We have so many important things like jobs, immigration, national security.
Let me ask both of you about that, because I saw an interview today with a Republican congressman, I believe from either Alabama or Mississippi, who believes that this is going to slow down the repeal of Obamacare because he claims some of Republicans who are in swing districts, quote, don't have the backbone because of everything that we're seeing at these town hall meetings.
Absolutely. And I want to just take a minute to echo that. I think we're seeing this grassroots movement is real. Today I was getting my hair cut. There was probably 10 or 15 women that was in and out of the salon. The number one thing everyone talked about was their fear of what was going to happen to public education, their fear about what was going to happen with health care. When typically you're in getting your haircut and what they're all talking about is where they're going to take their next vacation or how their kids are doing in school. And there's definitely among women, the woman who cleans my pool, spectacular woman, knocked on my door and said, what can I do to get involved? To Wendy's point, we're seeing a lot of women who are not engaged, who are looking to become engaged because they in particular feel that their rights are really at risk. So we're going to see what happens, and it isn't obstructionism to be questioning what Congress is doing. That is what democracy is about.
I
and
agree,
that's
but
what democracy looks like.
I agree, but if you actually read the document, what they say in there is they lay out a plan to obstruct, to hold up Congress from getting the important stuff done, not just to express their views. And what's important to remember, too, is just because this exists doesn't mean it's going to be effective.
Wendy, it sounds like basically what happened in 2010 with the Tea Party.
Well, it is. I have read it, and what most of it is about is what are the techniques that are most likely to actually influence your Congress member, and what are the techniques that will not influence him. It's basically, it's written by some former congressional staffers, advice to citizens on how can you actually affect your Congress member as opposed to throwing out some sort of communication that he'll laugh off. To Rita, I got to say, I believe, Rita, that only time will tell whether this movement is real. I just am seeing some interesting things that I hadn't seen before in terms of grassroots reaction, and Republican Congress members are worried about it. During the past recess, Vern Buchanan, rather than hold a town hall meeting, which is something he does frequently and brags that he does frequently,
And we're
left
anxious
the
to have
country.
him do again.
Vern holds
he
so
left
many
the
town
country.
halls. He was in Afghanistan visiting the troops. That's the truth.
And
The
we
town
He has
has
been-
been
he has
I'll tell you
not
what,
done one
why
since
don't
the
we
election.
close on that issue in a moment, but we have to take a quick break. When we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about the criminal justice system and the media with Donald Trump. Welcome back. What message from the White House stood out to our guests this week? And they join us right now for final thoughts. And I would vote for the fact that the president took issue with a lot of the tenor at the town hall meetings that are going around the country. We've all seen the videotape, including here in the Tampa Bay area. But Wendy, as you said before the break, Congressman Buchanan has not had one.
Well, I was mentioning him only as one example. Marco Rubio went to Europe also, came back sort of in secret Wednesday night. Dennis Ross, who represents a large chunk of Hillsborough
I've
and
heard of
Lakeland
him.
County. That's right, you know him well. He held a town hall meeting, but it was way up in Lake County, far from the populated areas of his district. Meanwhile, Gus Bilirakis held 3 meetings. Listening sessions, he called them. He was sort of the exemplar, maybe, of how a Republican could have or should have handled these things. But all across the nation, Republicans are avoiding these gatherings to a degree that they haven't previously.
Christian, I'll give you a chance, but Rita, I'll let you go first.
I think the fact that it's week 5 and we've not ever had a bar this low for our expectations for a president of the United States. And I think the fact is people are watching how many days he'll go without tweeting something that could set off, world explosions. So I
guess, Christian, I know you're very proud in terms of how the president is moving the agenda that he campaigned on. Do you at all get concerned about when we're talking about all these other things that seem to be distractions from what he's trying to do?
No, I care about what the president does. And you look at Donald Trump during the entire campaign. He focused on his campaign. He focused on his message. Every once in a while, he would tweet something out, and the media would be hysteric. And guess what? He kept pounding away in the campaign, and he won. And that's what you're going to see happen with America is, all the media, they're kind of focused on all these shiny objects, and that's where their attention goes. And meanwhile, he's signing executive orders. He's meeting with individuals. You have, again, consumer confidence going up. You have the Dow Jones going up. The economy's starting to look good. And he's executing to a T what he promised.
All right, we have to leave it there. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about the White House's decision to block certain news agencies from today's press briefing. CNN, Politico, the New York Times, and LA Times were blocked from an off-camera gaggle at the White House. The Associated Press and Time Magazine were granted access but declined in protest. Outlets friendly to the administration like Fox News and Breitbart were allowed in, and here's what some of our viewers are saying about that. Robin Cooper writes, "It is straight out of the authoritarian playbook." Cheryl Schieffer writes, "No, it's about the time that Trump is our president and he is going to save our country. Get smart, America." And Kevin Kamanga writes, "Suppression of the free press is a slippery slope." And Susan Rizzo writes, "White House cherry picks the press for the first time ever. Even Ari Fisher disagrees with this. He said it was unwise and counterproductive for the press secretary to keep them out." What are you thinking about the week in the White House? Let us know by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Rita Ferrandino is with the Sarasota County Democratic Party. Christian Ziegler is a Republican state committee man for Sarasota County. And Wendy March is a veteran political reporter who works as a correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times.